My name's Carl Moose. I'm one of the owners of GreenLight Energy, and I'm a property owner just like you. I've developed an energized real estate model for property owners to install solar and become a power producer instead of a power consumer and add value to your building by generating additional revenue from your property.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Get ready for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Join hundreds of real estate investors for networking, learning, and growth. Be sure to mark your calendars for April 24th and 25th of 2025. Hello and welcome to episode 483. Renewable energy isn't just about sustainability. It's a strategic tool for boosting cash flow, increasing net operating income, and maximizing property value in commercial real estate. Carl Moose is an expert at the intersection of real estate and renewable energy, helping investors and business owners transform their buildings into high-performing assets. As the creator of the Energized Real Estate Model and co-owner of GreenLight Energy Solutions, Carl specializes in leveraging federal, state, and utility incentives to unlock hidden value in properties. Today, he's here to share how smart energy strategies can give commercial real estate owners a major competitive edge. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Tell us a little bit about what you do. When we talk about renewable energy, what are we talking about and how does that apply to commercial real estate?
So my background real quickly, I'm a former banker, commercial real estate investor, and I've been in renewables since '04. And when we developed the Energized Real Estate Model, we really were looking at it from the property owner's perspective. As you know, how do we add value, to a property? Well, for a commercial property, it's increasing NOI, which means either increasing income or reducing expenses. And for many property owners, electricity is a major expense. So when we have solar available to us, the fuel source is free. It's capturing it and converting it to electricity and then monetizing that by either charging your tenants a higher rent and incorporating electricity into their rental income, or just charging them under a power purchase agreement for the energy you produce on your roof.
Yeah, I've long thought that the future of property management, asset management, and improving NOI really has to do with cost reduction. And I think that figuring out ways to apply renewable energy strategies to your property is a great way to achieve that. So kind of run us through the gamut. Like, how are people accessing renewable energy across this country, whether it be through solar or other means? And what kind of success stories have you seen so far?
If you think about a commercial piece of property, your roof is your biggest system for the building, right? It's the biggest system between your HVAC, your windows, all your components. The roof is the biggest system, and it's the one we think about the least, out of sight, out of mind. At least I did when I owned my property. Also, the sun hits the roof all day, every day, if you're in a good solar resource area. So how do you take that energy that's pounding your roof and converting it into electricity? And most people that we work with do that by installing solar. And once you install that solar to the roof, now you're producing energy for that property, which again can be sold to your tenants or incorporated into the rent, and then you can charge them a higher rent per square foot. In addition to that, the federal incentives are pretty significant. Anywhere from 30 to 50% of the cost of the solar system can come back to you as the property owner in a federal tax credit, dollar for dollar federal tax credit. And many states and utilities also offer direct pay and tax credits for installing solar on your building.
So just starting with the idea of adding solar to your property, what's the threshold you have to get over to even consider doing that? Do you need to have a big enough roof? Do you have, is there a certain size, a location? What do you look for when you're just assessing the viability of a solar project?
And we're talking about commercial, not residential?
When I say commercial, it could be apartment buildings, which would be residential as well. So let's say retail, center, commercial apartment building, industrial, you name it. Consider them all to be kind of under the same umbrella.
So the threshold is real. You can look at it from two perspectives. One is the cost of your electric bill, and then the size of your roof. Those are the two components. So if you're paying more than about $800 or $900 a month in rent, whether it's common area for an apartment building, or if you have a strip center or a retail or a industrial, if you're paying more than about $800 a month and you have a roof that's at least 5 to 10,000 square feet, you're a candidate for solar. In other words, that's the low end threshold.
I want to make sure I'm clear. So if you're paying 800 or 900, you said in rent, but do you mean in utility costs and electric costs?
Yeah, in electric costs.
That's kind of the basic threshold as to, hey, should you even consider solar?
Yeah, if you're paying less than about $800 a month in electric bills, it's probably not going to pencil out. And if you have a roof that's smaller than, say, 5 or 10,000 square feet, it's probably not going to pencil out. Anything above that, it works really well. Up to, we've done projects with 600, 700,000 square foot roofs and tens of thousands of dollars in electric bills. So the low end threshold, and for an apartment, one of the challenges with apartment buildings is usually the electric is paid by the tenant, unless, of course, you bundle that into the rent and charge a higher rental rate per square foot. And in essence, when you do that, not only are you a landlord renting out living space, now you're in the power production business as well, right? And that applies to commercial industrial properties also. If you're say hypothetically, you're a plastic injection molding manufacturer or a plating company, you own your building and you run the business, now you put solar up there, that building is not only housing your business, it's also a power plant. So not only are you in that plating business or the plastic injection molding business, you're now producing your own energy, which means you're no longer dependent on the utility company, right? Because you're producing your own energy. And as a producer of clean energy, that building owner captures all the carbon credits. They capture all the federal and state incentives. They capture all the accelerated depreciation that goes along with the new renewable project. And they also are improving the value of their building, because now that building not only has that NOI, rental income, it's also producing income or saving money if you own the building by producing your own energy.
Let me step into one of the things you said, and that is if you're going to add solar to an apartment building, as an owner of apartment buildings, I would much rather figure out a way to do a monthly utility bill, kind of like a payback bill, than increase rent. Because when tenants look at where they want to live, the rent comparisons are very important to them. So if they're paying higher rent, even though they might be getting the utilities included, they'll always go for the lower rent. So have you seen it done in ways where you can kind of just bill on a monthly basis? It's sort of like a RUBS or a tenant reimbursement, utility reimbursement cost.
100%. That's called sub-metering. So what you would do would be you would actually keep track of what each unit is using in terms of electricity, and you would just bill them. It's a little bit more additional administrative work for your team. However, it's done all the time. It's called sub-metering. And the real benefit there is, again, instead of you're collecting from the rent based on how much energy that particular unit uses, but you're not paying the power company, you're actually creating a new revenue stream for your bottom line. And it's called sub-metering, right? So you could keep track of each and every unit. It just adds a little bit of work each month. It's not a big deal. It depends how many units you have in that building, but you just have to track it and then bill accordingly.
Well, take us through the process here. So you talked about kind of the basic threshold. If you're paying over $800-900 a month for electric, and you have a roof that's more than 5,000 square foot of space on top of it, you might be a good candidate for adding solar. What do you do? So what do you do next? Who do you contact? Because it's not like you're just going to go buy the solar panels at Home Depot and throw them on the roof.
Well, you definitely don't want to go buy the solar panels at Home Depot. Those are the lowest end solar panels you can find for sure. And remember, you want to deal with a certified, registered, agency. It's called an EPC, which stands for Engineering, Procurement, and Construction Company. They're spread all over the country. We work in the Midwest primarily, our company. But we have contacts all over the country. You want to find a reputable EPC, and that's what it's called, Engineering, Procurement, and Construction Company. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to take a look at your building, the size of your roof. And then the second thing they're going to do is look at how much energy you're trying to produce. Now, let's take an example of an apartment building. Say, for example, a 10-unit apartment building, right? So each of those 10 units might be using, just on average, let's say they might be using $100 a month in electric, right? Which is pretty close, probably, depending on the size of the units, depending on where they are, the air conditioners, whether the stoves are electric, all those type of, the heat might be electric. So let's just say it's $100 a month. So you've got, 10 units at $100 a month. So that's $1,000 a month that your tenants are paying in electric, not to mention the common area as the property owner that you might be paying. You might be paying another $80 or $100 a month just in common area, right? So let's just call it $1,100 a month. So we would take a look at that consumption for that building, that property, and we would take a look at how big your roof is and what solar resource you have in the area. And then we would do an assessment based on the amount of energy you're consuming and the amount of energy you can produce. In a perfect world, there's enough room on your roof where we could put enough panels to satisfy 100% of the consumption for all the units in that building. And you would engage a company like ours to come out and do that analysis. Typically, there's no charge for that assessment. And we would produce a report that tells you exactly what incentives you qualify for that location, exactly how much energy you would produce, exactly how much energy you'd be saving, and then what the design looks like and what the cost of that system would be, including the payback, where you would break even on that investment, right? And then if it all looked good to you, you would sign a contract. We would come out, do a site survey with an electrical engineer and a structural engineer to make sure that everything is okay for solar system. And very rarely do we have a problem with that, by the way. The solar system does not add that much weight to the roof. So then we would do that engineering study, and then we would apply for permits. And then once the permits are issued, we would come out and install the solar. Most EPCs manage everything from soup to nuts. The only thing that we don't do, because we're not qualified to do that, is file your taxes. And when I mention that, because there are significant tax incentives, both on the federal and the state level, depending on which state you live in, that you can take advantage of as the owner of that power plant.
What you just said, finding a qualified EPC, it's perfect who, not how situation there. It's like, who can you get to help you maximize solar, renewable energy at your property? I'm actually going through this process right now on a building that we own, where we're going through, they've measured the roof, they've come to the site to look at our existing electrical. We're going through that process to dial in on what the different solar options are and what they will cost. It's interesting because it's a 100-unit building, and the roof space that we have available, which is actually a garage, a 37-car garage, will only allow us to produce maybe 50 to 60% of the power that the building actually uses. But in this case, that may be a good thing, because we won't have any excess capacity that we would have to worry about, either figuring out how to sell back to the grid or storing in batteries. It's like, as it's produced, it's going to be used. So that's been presented to me as a good thing. I mean, what do you normally see? Are people able to achieve 100% reduction or more, or do they usually fall a little bit short?
Normally, what we see more frequently is people falling short, as opposed to people having enough roof space to produce extra energy. And remember, every state is a little bit different. So in Illinois, we happen to live in what's called a net metering state. Net metering. And what that means is the power company is not going to pay you for any excess power, but they will give you credit for excess power. And that's called a net metering situation. Here in Illinois, 8 months out of the year are high production months. 4 months, including November, December, January, February, are what's called low production months. So the power companies allow you to overproduce in the 8 high production months and build up a credit, so that in November, December, January, February, where it's low production, you can actually use those credits to net out your meter, right? So it's called a net metering scenario. The other type is called a feed-in tariff, right? There's some states that are called feed-in tariffs. What that means is you produce energy, and any excess energy you produce will actually go into the grid, and the power company will pay you for that power. That's a less desirable situation, only because the power company may give you 4 or 5 cents per kilowatt, while they're charging 15, 16, 17 cents per kilowatt. So The net metering is actually a better scenario. And I think there's about 9 or 10 states that are net metering, and the bulk of the rest are feed-in tariffs. Either way, you're producing energy. So that's not a bad thing. And again, in a net metering environment, we try to offset by 100%. In other words, offset means we produce over the course of 12 months exactly what you consume over 12 months, because there's no benefit in producing extra energy because you won't get paid for it, right? And you're just building a credit that you'll never use. So our design guys always look at, can we get to 100% offset? And about 80% of the time, we can get to 100% offset. The other time is a scenario like yours, where you're just producing 50, 60, 70, 80% of the consumption, which is still a good scenario because you're saving on that portion of the bill.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference, happening April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This event is the perfect place to connect with fellow real estate investors, gain valuable insights, and elevate your real estate game. With a lineup of expert speakers and numerous networking opportunities, you won't want to miss it. As you talk about the different states, I'd imagine there's some, I'll call them resistance points, like the state policy and then utility policy. What do you typically run into around the country when it comes to those two entities?
Yeah, so remember, the state energy production is regulated on a state level. So every state has their own power authority, right? And some states are more renewable friendly than others, right? And say, for example, take Ohio, for example. I think there's about 17 different power companies throughout Ohio. So Ohio, even though they have good incentives and a state government that's renewable friendly, only certain power companies participate in these programs. Illinois, on the other hand, we only have 2 power companies. We have a power company in Northern Illinois and one in Southern Illinois. Both of them are renewable friendly, right? Florida, for example, is not a real renewable energy friendly state, even though it's a sunshine state. Solar is tough to get done down there, primarily because of the state regulations and the power companies. Texas is another state. Texas is an oil and gas state, right? They don't really want renewables because their energy, they farm their energy right under their feet in the form of natural gas and oil. So every state is a little bit different depending on what the regulations are and the power utility companies that are in those states. Some good states, Illinois is one of the best states. North Carolina, South Carolina are pretty good states. Massachusetts a good state. New York's a good state. Michigan's a good state. And again, it kind of trickles down from there. However, any state in the union can take advantage of the federal programs, and the federal programs are the real robust ones.
If you're going to put together a solar project at your property, you want to leverage as many different grants, credits as you possibly can. What is available at the federal level? And then a follow-up question, of course, will be, will it still be available, next month?
So the big one is called the section, it's under the IRS, it's called the Section 45 and Section 48. The Section 48 is related to solar energy, right? And under that, you've got the production tax credit and the investment tax credit. The investment tax credit is the one that pays the biggest return, right? It's called the ITC. You can qualify, and most people do. Most properties qualify for a 30% and as high as 60% federal tax credit, dollar for dollar, on your solar energy projects. In other words, if you spend $100,000 on a project, you will qualify for a minimum of $30,000 in a federal dollar for dollar tax credit, not a deduction, a tax credit, which comes off your bottom line tax liability, up to 60%. So it could be as much as 60,000. Now, there's some hoops you have to jump through to go from 30 to 60. Most projects qualify for 40 to 50%. All programs qualify for the 30%. So at a minimum, you'll get 30 cents back on every dollar you spend on the ITC.
That comes right off your tax bill for the property. So if you spend $100,000, $30,000 comes off your IRS tax bill at the end of the tax year.
That's correct.
Does that carry over if you don't need it?
The way I understand it, and again, I'm not an accountant, just to let you know, Brian, but the way I understand it is you can go back 2 years, you can carry it back 2 years, and you can carry it forward until 2030. So we've got a runway here. So if you don't have the tax liability or you can't use 100% of the tax credit this year, you can carry it forward next year, the year after. And I think I take that back. It goes for 10 years. So you've got time to use up that credit. And again, that's where your accountant or your CFO comes in.
But is there also depreciation on that investment too? So on top of that 30%, you can depreciate the capital expenditure that you made.
So there is accelerated depreciation for renewable energy projects. The acronym is MACRS, right? And that allows you to depreciate 80% of the cost of the system over a 5-year period. So you can depreciate that over a 5-year period. 80% of the cost. So if you spend $100,000, you can depreciate 80% of that over a 5-year period. So in addition to the ITC, you also qualify for that MACRS, right? There's also Section 179. Some buildings qualify for that, some don't. But your accountant should be able to investigate that for you. So the three big ones, Brian, are the federal ITC, the MACRS, and the Section 179. On top of that, we also have everybody do what's called a cost segregation study, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That is a study that takes a look at the entire building, not only the renewable side of the equation. And that's usually a pretty good return on the investment. Some cost somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000 to do that study. We partnered up with a nationwide company that does that. Oftentimes, you're going to save anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 in terms of tax liability that you could pull in on an accelerated depreciation. So there's a number of things on the federal level that really are worth taking a look at. And if your accountant or CFO is not familiar with it, I just gave you the information to do that research. There's a lot of information about that, and everybody should look at it. Now, you talked about grants and other programs. Believe it or not, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a grant. It's called the REAP grant, right? Rural Energy America project, right? And you can get up to 50% of the cost of your system if you're in a grant area. There's certain rural areas where they want renewable energy projects, right? That's 50% of a grant. So if you spend $100,000, they will give you $50,000 in a non-refundable grant on top of all the other incentives I just spoke about. The Department of Energy also has grants and programs as well. So again, that takes a little bit of investigating. However, all you have to do is go to the National Renewable Energy Lab and search grants or incentive programs, and they'll be listed there for you. So there's a lot out there that property owners just simply don't know about.
Even with the grants, the tax credits, you're still going to have to come up with some money out of pocket. And I know groups like yours will help figure out, well, what's the payback period on that, which is very important. Here in Michigan, as I'm going through this process myself, there's a funding mechanism through a group called Michigan Saves, where they have money allocated to help lend toward this. Now, I don't know what their interest rates are yet, but I'll hopefully find out soon. What else? What other types of funding mechanisms do you see out there in the country?
Yeah, very interesting you say that. So let's go back to the ITCs for a moment. So the ITCs you can actually sell on the open market. There are people out there that have high tax liabilities that are looking for tax credits or tax breaks, and you can monetize those. Those typically trade for somewhere between 80 to 95 cents on the dollar. So that's one way to monetize your system. The other way is there's an agency out there. We're very familiar with Freddie and Fannie, right? Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae for residential financing. A lot of people think those are government agencies. They're not. They're actually private corporations sponsored by the federal government. They get their money from the Fed very inexpensive. For renewables, there's a program called PACE, which is very similar to Freddie and Fannie. It's for property assessed clean energy programs, right? And depending on where you are, what state you're in, and I believe Michigan participates, you can Google PACE lenders, and a list will come up of banks that are administrators of that PACE program. And what that allows you to do on the residential side is roll up that financing in a PACE loan. On commercial, it's called CPACE, and that just stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, right? So if you own a commercial property, whether it's an apartment building or manufacturing or warehouse, you can Google CPACE lenders, and in your area, they will come up, and they have special programs. Depending on a couple of criteria, your property might qualify for 100% financing. In other words, depending on how much leverage you have on the property and what the value of the property is, you could potentially take that $100,000 investment and capitalize that 100% through the CPACE lender. So you wouldn't have to tap into your CapEx budget or come out of pocket to pay for the system.
So we're talking a lot about solar and when it comes to renewable energy, but are there other forms of renewable energy that you're aware of, that you work with? I'm thinking geothermal, anything else that should be on the table in this discussion?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I have a degree in geology. So I originally got into this with geothermal and wind. And again, the solar energy, all energy derives from solar. Even hydrocarbons it was 600 million years ago, plants and animals were collecting energy from the sun. They died, they got buried, and they became hydrocarbons. So wind energy is not the rotation of the earth, it's the change in temperature, right? And so everything is solar energy. Solar is the fastest path. You putting up a wind farm, or not a wind farm, but a wind turbine at your building, the permitting on that is a nightmare. It's been done in rural areas, but if you're in any area that has density, that's just it's just a long process, and it normally doesn't get approved. Geothermal, again, depending on where you are, if you're out in a rural area, those are great programs. They usually they're costly. They usually take a lot more engineering and architectural design, and the payback is over a longer period of time. Your quickest path to cash is harvesting that energy right when it shines, the sunshine. It comes down, it hits the solar panels, it produces energy instantaneously. So that's why we've migrated over to the solar end of the spectrum with regard to renewables, because for property owners, that's the fastest way to capitalize on renewable energy.
I follow a lot of technology podcasts and writers, and really the message that I'm getting about solar is that it's reached this point where it can, like the technology is at a place where you can install it at a price that makes sense, and it can provide a lot of the power that this country needs. So where are we really? I mean, is that true? Like, why isn't solar up on every building at this point?
That's our mission, really, is to open people's eyes to this. So think about it like this, from a technical standpoint. Solar panel technology is not driven by the renewable energy market. It's driven by the satellite market, right? I'll repeat that. Solar panel technology is driven by the satellite technology market. Every satellite, every microscope, everything that goes up in space that needs power is powered by solar panels, right? 10 years ago, Brian, there were 1,000 satellites up there. Now there's over 10,000 satellites up there. And if you're going to spend the money to send something in space, you better make sure it's dependable, it's reliable, it's efficient, it's maintenance free, and it's going to stay up there for a long time, right? Well, all that space age technology has now trickled down to the rooftop, right? And so the panels we're installing today on your building and my building are panels that were going up in space 10 years ago. So that technology has really reached a point where it's very effective, very efficient, very low maintenance. And you put them up there, the sun shines, they produce energy. So that's what's happening in the solar panel side of the equation. with each panel, by the way, has its own IP address. So now you can track the performance of each panel you have on your building. We just installed 870 panels on a building, and each and every one of those panels we can monitor on if you have a cell phone and an internet connection, no matter where you are in the world, you can monitor it, right? And the inverter technology, which primarily comes out of Europe, is such that they're producing as much energy as you can out of those panels. So the technology has gotten to a place where it's pretty effective, pretty efficient, pretty reliable, and the cost has come down. But here's the kicker. When you bake in all the incentives, both on the federal, state, utility level, these projects pencil out and often pay themselves back in as short as anywhere from 3 to 6 years. So that capital investment you're getting back, and those panels are going to last for 30 years. So once it's capitalized, once you recoup that capitalization, then your energy is free because the sun costs nothing. The sunlight is free. The capital cost, Brian, is capturing it and converting it. But once that's capitalized, you have a free energy source.
Everything you just said in that response is gold. And I didn't realize that satellite technology is what was driving solar technology. And that's the first time I've heard anyone make that connection, but it makes a lot of sense.
Nobody does, right? I mean, unless you're in this business, you don't really know that, right? And again, oftentimes, Brian, we sit down with CFOs and accountants that are a lot smarter than I am with regard, they're not aware of the programs because they're so focused. I mentioned a plating company and a plastic injection molding company. These guys make $150 million a year. I mean, they have a $150 million plastic injection molding company making bottle caps and everything. Smart guys. I mean, these are smart people. And their CFO had no idea about this. And it's not their fault. It's just they're not immersed in it like we are. And again, when I talk to a property owner, I tell them 3 things. I said, I want to show you how to take your biggest liability, your roof, and turn it into an asset. And unless you're the United Center or Allstate Arena or some big companies paying you for that roof space, your roof is a liability. Number 2, I want to show you how to take one of your biggest variable expenses, your electric bill, and fix it for the next 30 years because electric bills are not going down, they're going up, and they vary, right? And then the third thing is I want to show you how to take federal, state, utility incentives to pay for it. Now, I didn't say solar in any of that, right? It's liabilities become assets, variable expenses become fixed, and use federal, state, utility money. Solar is just the way you put it all together. So when you're talking to a property owner, that makes sense to them. The other thing I tell them is I always ask them, so what's your return? What's your ROI when you pay your federal taxes, right? I often get a confused look or people say 0. I get 0 return on that. And then I follow up and say, when you pay your electric bill, and I know you pay your electric bill because the lights are on, what's your ROI on that? And they say the same thing, 0, right? Well, when you go solar, you actually get a return on the federal tax that you pay because you get that credit. And now you're not paying the power company for utilities. You're paying yourself. You're investing in your building and you actually have your own power plant. So you actually get an ROI on those investments. And business people understand that. I don't usually talk about solar until 5-10 minutes into the conversation. It's really a business proposition that we're talking about. And by the way, that's why Home Depot's doing it. eBay's doing it on their big buildings. FedEx is doing it. Target's doing it. Menards is doing it. Chase Bank's doing it. Not because they're saying, look at me, I'm green. It's because they know that it's a smart business decision.
Carl, how would people find out more about you, your company, the services you offer, and who would you even want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, certainly anybody in the Midwest. We work throughout the Midwest, but anybody in general. Our website is www.greenlightenergy.solar, not .com, .solar. And then anybody can email me at Carl, CARL, at greenlightenergy.solar. And again, we have a team of design people on staff. It really starts with that electric bill and the address. We also, Brian, do community solar and ground mount as well as building mount. So, if any of your listeners have a factory out in the middle of, away from a urban area or a suburban area, urban area, in a rural area, and they have extra land, we also do ground mount as well as roof mount. And we also are involved in community solar, which is a whole nother conversation. But, for building owners, it really does make sense to go through the process because then you have the information. And we don't charge anything for that, Brian. There's no cost, no obligation for us to do our work. And if we're not active in your specific area, we're part of a national association of registered, qualified, certified EPCs. we can definitely put you in touch with somebody in your area.
Carl, thanks for coming on the show today and talking about solar and renewable energies. I think that you put it in words that investors and owners can understand. I think a lot of people, one of my perceptions is one of the reasons this really hasn't just spread like wildfire through our country is because a lot of people don't really know how to speak the language of the property owners and the investors. And instead they talk about kilowatts per hour and gigawatts per hour, and nobody even understands what that means. But I think you do a great job of just putting it in words and context that we can understand. So thanks for coming on the show and having this conversation today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Brian. And one of the reasons I buy buildings, I own buildings. I mean, I look at it from your perspective. So absolutely be more than happy to help any of your listeners.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. And remember to save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference on April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's going to be an event you won't want to miss, packed with invaluable sessions and opportunities to connect with like-minded investors. Keep listening for more updates, and we look forward to seeing you there. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.